A mistake. Lithuania's president slams the use of the word Taiwanese in the representative office in Vilnius. Blasting Omicron, why some say Taiwan's booster plan should be sped up. Boycott Beijing. We talked to one activist who says China is using the Winter's Games to sports wash atrocities. And it may be small, but it turns out Taiwan's green island is big on biodiversity. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. Taiwan is weighing comments from Lithuania's president, who criticized the use of the word Taiwanese in the name of its office in Vilnius. Gitanas Nausėda said it was a mistake to call it the Taiwanese representative office in Lithuania. Other offices in Europe use Taipei. China claims Taiwan as part of its territory and forbids any international recognition of it as a country. Beijing has downgraded its relations with Vilnius in response to Lithuania's warming ties with Taiwan. Rick Glauert reports on the European Union's balancing act in responding to pressure from China.
It has been a beautiful friendship so far. Bonhomie between Lithuania and Taiwan has blossomed in the last year, with news this week that sales of Lithuania goods in Taiwan have boomed. But the Eastern European countries' bold move to pursue closer ties with Taiwan in the face of China's wrath, including downgrading ties and blocking Lithuanian goods from its market, has also now caused trouble at home. On Tuesday, the Lithuanian president said that the opening of a Taiwan representative office in Vilnius using the name Taiwanese, which is forbidden by China, was a mistake. His remarks put him at odds with the Prime Minister, who supports Taiwan.
But internal politics in Lithuania is not easy, as in any democratic country. So the current president of Lithuania is, to some extent, a political opponent of the current government in Lithuania, which is led by a prime minister. So there are internal disputes, there are rivalries between them over many issues, mainly domestic issues, and unfortunately that has spilled over into foreign policy issues like the Taiwan policy.
Although the president's comments may be more about politics than actual opposition to Taiwan, Lithuanian media have recently reported that more than 40% of the population opposed the swing from China to Taiwan. 33% were in favour. The Lithuania case has sparked wider soul-searching in the European Union as it contemplates how to counter Chinese attacks on the bloc. So far, EU efforts to mediate between Lithuania and China have failed. On Tuesday, EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen spoke to Lithuania's PM on trade irritants. The Commission has also floated an anti-coercion instrument that would allow it to impose tariffs or block exports from countries using economic arm twisting against the EU.
The EU anti-coercion instrument will be an important tool to defend EU member states and member countries when they are pressured by somebody from the outside, like China. But the thing is that it will take at least 1.5 years till it will be put in place, put in power.
Taiwan's new friendship may have hit its first little snag, but the fact that it has sparked wider conversation with Europe may prove to be more valuable in the years to come. Klein Wang and Rick Glauert for TaiwanPlus.
And Rick spoke to the London correspondent from our media partner, Taiwan's Central News Agency, London. He asked Chen Yunyu, who is in the capital Vilnius, about the divisions over Taiwan in Lithuanian politics.
The president's statement has caused strong reactions from some politicians in Lithuania because, first of all, even if there are disagreements between the prime minister and the president or inside the cabinet, it is better not to make it public, especially on such an important issue as foreign policy and policy towards China and Taiwan, and especially in this context when Lithuania is facing very strong pressure and intimidation from Beijing.
And how would you describe support for Taiwan in Lithuania among the people and the politicians?
Taiwan and China are often on the news, but it doesn't mean that when you walk on the streets, we will hear many people talking about Taiwan or China. It's always people who are more informative, who are more far-sighted, who are more inside politics, who are really talking seriously about China and Taiwan. And now the biggest issue is the economic pressure from Beijing, because although China is not one of the 10 biggest trade partners of Lithuania, but trade volume between Taiwan and Lithuania is even more insignificant.
And what do you think all of this means for the Taiwan-Lithuania friendship? Is the friendship set to continue?
Taiwan has to do more to influence the public opinion here in Lithuania. We have to take into account that next year there will be local elections, and 2024 there will be elections to the parliament and the presidential election. So we only have maybe about 2 years to try really hard to set realistic goals and achieve something really tangible to prove to the Lithuanians, as our ambassador Huang Junyao Eric Huang said yesterday to me, to prove to the Lithuanian public that developing closer ties with Taiwan, it is beneficial for Lithuania, that the loss they endure on the Chinese market, it is not in vain, because they can gain even more from the relationship with Taiwan.
North Korea has fired an unidentified projectile off its east coast on Wednesday.
昨年来、北朝鮮が、連続して、ミサイルを、発射しているということ、これは誠に遺憾なことであります。政府としましては、これまで以上に、警戒監視強めていきたいと思いますが、いずれにせよ本件につきましても、今詳細、この早急に分析を行っているという状況にあります。以上です。
Japan's Coast Guard first reported the launch, saying it could be a ballistic missile, without providing details. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said it landed in the sea off the country's east coast. The United Nations prohibits North Korea from ballistic and nuclear weapons tests. The launch comes shortly after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un promised to push ahead with developing the country's military. Taiwan on Wednesday reported one new local case. A total of 5 cases now are linked to cleaners and a quarantined taxi driver at Taoyuan International Airport. 2 of them are known to have Omicron. As Louise Watt reports, the spread of the infectious variant is prompting calls to speed up booster jabs.
Soldiers disinfecting a parking lot and other areas of Taiwan Taoyuan International Airport after 3 cleaners and a quarantined taxi driver tested positive for COVID. One of the cleaners was confirmed as Taiwan's 3rd domestic Omicron case on Tuesday, a day after the country confirmed its first Omicron transmissions. The woman in her 40s had had 2 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Her case has led some experts to urge the government to shorten the time people have to wait to get a booster jab. Taiwan rolled out its booster program in early December. It began with medical workers and other people in high-risk categories who received their second shot at least 5 months earlier. Former National Taiwan University Hospital infectious disease doctor Kong Xiangqi says the cleaner had received her second dose of AstraZeneca about 5 months ago. He says that if she had received an mRNA booster, it would have increased her protection by 70%.
我觉得他假如在1个礼拜前有打第3剂半量莫德纳，搞不好他会避掉这个感染也不一定。明明就有疫苗，我不觉得为什么还要坚持5个月？这个5个月是怎么出来的？5个月是 Delta 的资料。
Countries including the UK and South Korea now give boosters after 3 months. Officials in France and Germany have also recommended a 3-month gap. Linkou Changgung Memorial Hospital Deputy Superintendent Cho Chang-shun wants to see Taiwan follow suit for people in high-risk groups, including medical personnel and frontline workers.
我们对于这群人的保护就是还是要加强。我想政府也是会考虑可以让大家再缩短这个中间的这个时间也许3个月就可以考虑来施打。
Because of its mutations, the highly contagious Omicron variant is slipping past some of the protection of vaccines, but initial studies suggest it is not as deadly as Delta. Health Minister Chen Shizhong said the Central Epidemic Command Center will discuss whether to shorten the interval between the second and third doses.
看到别人3个月，我们就3个月；看到别人2个月又1个月，我们就跟进。有一些片段的讯息或者有各国的经验，那由专家来做综合的评定是比较好。
Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen on Tuesday urged people who haven't yet had their first or second dose to get vaccinated as soon as possible. More than 80% of the country's eligible population has had a first dose, and around 70% 2 doses. Booster shots have so far been given to just 0.7% of the population. With the Lunar New Year just around the corner, and tens of thousands of people expected to return home for the holidays, airports are ramping up cleaning and disinfection. A command centre at Taoyuan Airport is also in place to speed up the testing of workers. With the Omicron variant now in the community, the focus is on containing its spread. Karma Xu and Louise Watt for TaiwanPlus.
After almost 2 weeks under strict lockdown, new COVID-19 cases are dropping in Xi'an in northern China. Local authorities have implemented restrictions following one of China's worst coronavirus outbreaks since the pandemic started in Wuhan. The measures are based on China's zero COVID policy and include mass testing, mask mandates and bans on residents leaving their communities. Novak Djokovic is set to defend his Australian Open title in Melbourne despite his controversial anti-vaccine stance. The men's #1 announced he has received a medical exemption to enter Australia without the mandatory 2-week quarantine. Australian Open organisers had stated all players must be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 to compete or have a medical exemption granted by an independent panel. The head of Tennis Australia said Djokovic has not been given special treatment, but a number of other players and many members of the public have expressed scepticism about the decision. Djokovic has won the Australian Open men's singles a record 9 times, including the last 3 years. This year's event starts on January 17th. January 4th marked a global day of action for activists calling on governments, athletes, corporate sponsors and medical partners to boycott the Winter Olympics in Beijing. Protests like this one in Berlin were held around the world by activists from Hong Kong, Xinjiang and Tibet. While they welcome the diplomatic boycott announced by many countries, they say it is not enough. China needs to be held accountable for its human rights violations. To learn more about the day of action, Ryan Ho-Kilpatrick spoke with Joey, a campaigner for Boycott Beijing 2022. She also works with rights groups Hong Kong Watch and the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China. He asked her what they hope to accomplish in the final month before the Games begin.
We need everyone, including world leaders, private companies, athletes, and actually every individual to also join us in this global boycott. So we have been asking broadcasting companies like NBC, BBC not to become a propaganda platform for the CCP, not to help wash the CCP's atrocities. We have also been asking companies like Mars and also Airbnb to also drop their sponsorship of the Games. And more importantly, we have been asking Olympic athletes to hear us and also to join us in boycotting the Games. And of course, we will also want every individual who were interested in watching the Games to join us in not watching the Games, because it is very crucial that every single one of us would take part in this global boycott and to send a very strong and also clear message to not only the CCP, but then also the international society that we're not legitimizing, we're not endorsing any regime that commits any kinds of human rights atrocities across the globe.
The IOC and Beijing like to talk about the Olympics and sport as something that unites people above and beyond politics. But do you think it's possible to separate sport and politics like that?
Seeing how the Chinese Communist Party has been trying to sports wash this escalating crackdowns in Hong Kong, the ongoing occupation of Tibet and genocide in East Turkestan, and also using it as a platform to export this propaganda, I think we should have realized that sports and politics are not separable, or at least not this time. And on top of that, with the IOC colluding with Beijing to cover up the punch drug crisis, and with the CCP's history of pressurizing the NBA and the other sports alliances to silence anyone who has been trying to speak up for Hong Kong, for the Uyghurs and the Tibetans, I think it is very clear that the two things cannot be separated, and not to mention the fact that we're not talking about politics right now, but an ongoing genocide, a humanitarian crisis that a lot of world leaders, a lot of us have promised never again. It is very clear that the two things cannot be separated.
Coming up, a landmark settlement and a bittersweet win for Indigenous Canadian communities. Details after the break.
Welcome to Legit Mando. It's Jacob here and Mr. Sweet Potato.
It's us again, the perfect duo.
你好吗？如果我跟他掉到海里，你会救我还是他？我喜欢你。
喜欢 means like.
I prefer telling people what I don't like.
吃过了吗？
北宫一鲜奶茶一样无糖少冰，要加小芋圆，不用吸管，谢谢。
I can't wait to learn more Mandarin. I'm just going by the script.
Your sarcasm is creeping back again.
Your feelings are correct.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. A same-sex couple in Taiwan has become the first in the nation to get a court approval for joint adoption. Miao Miao and Wei Wei sued the government to recognise both fathers as parents of Wei Wei's adopted daughter after they married. Taiwan's same-sex marriage law does not include the right to joint adoption, except when one member of the couple has a biological child. But a court in the southern city of Kaohsiung argued that adopted children should have the same rights as biological children. This week's court ruling only applies to Miao Miao and Wei Wei's case and does not set a legal precedent. Activists in the US are calling on electric car manufacturer Tesla to pull the plug on a newly opened showroom in China's northwestern Xinjiang region. The Council on American Islamic Relations says the company's involvement in Xinjiang amounts to economic support for genocide. Tesla announced the new showroom on Friday. The international community has widely criticized China for its treatment of Xinjiang's Uyghur Muslim population, but Beijing has threatened to retaliate against companies that stop doing business in the region. After a series of protests and lawsuits, the Canadian government has announced a $31.5 billion Canadian settlement to compensate Indigenous people harmed by the country's former residential school system and for longer-term reforms. Bing Wang reports.
The unmarked graves of more than 200 Indigenous Canadian children were found at this former residential school, founded by the Catholic Church and run between 1890 and 1978. The school is a remnant of the country's assimilation program between 1831 and 1996. Indigenous children will be forcibly picked up by cattle carts and buses and taken to these schools, separated from their families and isolated from their culture. The First Nations Child and Family Caring Society and the Assembly of First Nations first launched a lawsuit concerning the schools in 2007. But the discovery of the unmarked graves last year prompted renewed demands for the government to apologize and offer reparations. The Canadian government finally announced on Tuesday that it had reached a settlement of $31.5 billion Canadian dollars, or $25 billion US dollars. Half of it will go to survivors of the residential school system, with the other half earmarked for longer-term reforms.
I'm very pleased to announce that Canada and the parties have reached two significant agreements in principle. One that provides fair and equitable compensation to First Nations children and families harmed by discriminatory underfunding, and the other addressing the long-term reform that's needed for the First Nations Child and Family Services Program.
But Indigenous activists say the settlement barely scratches the surface.
we have a long way to go to address the poverty in our nations, and no amount of money will ever be the right amount, nor will it bring back a childhood lost. But today is about acknowledgement, about being seen and heard.
The residential schools were intentionally located far from indigenous communities to minimize contact between families. The government's policy was to assimilate the children into mainstream culture. More than 150,000 children were placed in the schools over the course of their existence. By the 1930s, an estimated 30% of indigenous children attended them. There were at least 6,000 reported deaths at the schools, but officials say the number is likely to be higher. After 6 years of research and more than 6,000 interviews, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission concluded the former assimilation policy was cultural genocide. Its report said indigenous children were deprived of their ancestral culture and languages, and many experienced physical and sexual abuse.
That's why we're called survivors. We survived the torture, we survived the containment, we survived the punishment, the brainwashing that happened to our kids.
While the landmark settlement is seen as a step in the right direction, the memories of the loss of their children and the abuses suffered will never be forgotten. Damon Lin and Bing Wang for TaiwanPlus.
A 2-year survey of the volcanic Green Island off Taiwan's southeast coast has revealed much greater local biodiversity than was previously understood. TaiwanPlus reporter Peachy Zhuang looks at what this means for the isolated and sparsely populated locality.
This small island of Taiwan's southeast coast, once a jail for political prisoners, is now a popular destination among scuba divers. But there's more to discover on Green Island than what's beneath the waters. Infrared cameras capture the movements of wild cicada. The size of the island's cicada population has been unknown up to now. Other footage shows reef muntjacs in different seasons. These results are part of an ongoing 2-year survey to map the ecology of Green Island, which has a human population of around 1,000, but gets over 150,000 visitors in the summer.
可以未来作为我们绿岛整个开发的一个相关的基础资料，那也可以作为我们生态旅游一个很重要的一个基础。
So far, the survey has identified 400 plant species, 19 species of land crab, 229 insect species, and 17 mammal species. Many of these had never been recorded on Green Island before.
那怎么去保育生态，然后去做环境教育的一个相关的素材。
The survey will continue for another 3 years to establish a complete and official record of Green Island's biodiversity. The locals hope to encourage more visitors without harming the environment, and the authorities believe that developing sustainable tourism relies on preserving the island's ecology. Rick Yi and Peachy Zhuang for TaiwanPlus.
TaiwanPlus has launched an online series to help people around the world learn Mandarin. Legit Mando is hosted by a sweet potato and Jacob Xiao. Our reporter Jaime Ocon spoke to the human host to find out what it's like on set.
It was really an honor to be chosen as the host of this Legit Mando TV program. It's quite challenging, to be honest. I still remember the first day I did a shooting of the show, and I really appreciate the crew for helping me go through the entire processing, everything. And it took me a while to memorize all the lines because they were like a lot of things, words, yeah. But the director was patient enough to do the whole shooting, because my Chinese, I think, I have some problem pronouncing some specific words.
Yeah.
You too, right? Yeah, like ang and ang together. I always have that problem.
For Legit Mando, what's your favorite part about being the face and helping spread Chinese learning in Taiwan?
I think teaching it's more than that, more than just teaching grammar, vocabulary. I think teaching could also be inspiring. Don't just teach, also be an inspiration. Teaching Mandarin is not only about that. It's also about inspiring the audience, the viewers, and showing that the Chinese cultures and the Taiwanese cultures are the themes, not just vocabulary and the word.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Mr. Sweet Potato? What kind of a potato is he? What's his personality like?
Oh, it's, I would say, naughty and fun-loving, and just like your best friend, always teasing you, but he meant well, like in an unfriendly or hostile way, not mean, not like that. It's more like because he knows you very well, you two are very close. So I had this image in my head. I know exactly what the potato's going to say, and just try to picture the face and how I'm going to respond. Pretend that this is a real person next to me, and I'm doing this with my best friend. And then it's going to be easier.
To watch the full episodes of Legit Mando, visit our website at TaiwanPlus.com. Thanks for watching Taiwan Plus News. I'm Yin Khvat. We leave you with footage of a giant panda cub playing in the snow at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, please download the Taiwan Plus app. Stay safe and see you next time.